When we as comic book fans talk about Jason Todd, we usually skip straight to the crowbar, the explosion, death in the family, how tragic it was for Batman to lose one of his Robins, and then we move on to talking about Red Hood and how DC has routinely fumbled Red Hood even though he's a fan favorite character, and how they haven't had a clear direction for him in the last 20 years since his initial appearance. But with all the talk of Jason as Red Hood, I think we tend to forget a lot about his time as Robin, and specifically his original origin, which had absolutely nothing to do with the street kid orphan you're probably used to. As a matter of fact, Jason Todd was basically Dick Grayson with orange hair. The entire origin to Jason was damn near bar for bar just like Dick Grayson's, except it also served as the first introduction to Killer Croc as a main villain in a Batman series, and Jason's costume was far more goofy than Robin's in general. Although, I do wonder how it would look in a modern day reimagining, because I could imagine the suit could look pretty good nowadays. Throughout Jason's original run as Robin, we see he takes a very similar path to Dick Grayson. Batman takes him in, he's an acrobat, so he's a natural at doing things that involve superhero antics, much as Batman was doing at the time. But Bruce sidelines Jason for fear of putting him in the same danger that he put Dick Grayson in all throughout Dick's childhood. So we see him for a couple issues be more of a plot device, whether that's being kidnapped or manipulated or sneaking around trying his best to help Batman. We just see him spend a lot of time playing as Bruce's ward and really just plot device. But from a personality standpoint, he is genuinely indistinguishable from Dick Grayson. They are both kind, loving, good-hearted people at their core, who have very little flaws. They both shared the exact same purpose in being the bright light in Batman's dark mythos. That's the whole point of the two characters being around. And it only gets even worse when Jason dyes his hair black and assumes the mantle of Robin for a temporary reprieve to help Batman deal with the Joker. Very ironic that his first true appearance as Robin comes against the Joker. Although Batman makes him renounce the identity of Robin, at least for a little bit, as Bruce feels like he's stealing the identity of Dick Grayson, and he's not really flying with that. So he makes Jason try to come up with his own unique character, even though his hair stays black. But eventually Dick gives him the full mantle of Robin, and as we know, Dick Grayson moves on to being Nightwing. And from then on, for at least a couple more issues, he becomes legitimately indistinguishable from Dick. I know I've said this before, but now that he is no longer sporting his hair, unless Batman makes the direct mention of Dick Grayson, if you were to just pick up a comic book, you wouldn't know the difference between the two characters at this point. They are carbon copies of one another, and that's all there is for that character. It was a way to let Dick's character move on and to be with the Teen Titans and to have his own books and his own story adventures, but allow Batman to have a Robin. There's a unique kind of tragedy in being a character that only exists to fill the shoes of another, and to not even make filling those shoes your own. Jason quite literally only existed so that Dick Grayson could still be Batman's sidekick. The only unique factors that Jason had over Dick was the person who killed his parents, and the fact that his name was Jason, because they took away his red hair, his one defining feature that made him different from Dick Grayson. They took it away from him in favor of making Robin more uniform and making it far easier for somebody who's a casual reader to pick up a book and say, oh, it's still just Batman and Robin. He made it far easier to just look at him and say, this is just Dick Grayson on the cover. That way Dick could go off and join the Titans. Dick could go off and become Nightwing. He'd go do his own thing, and DC wouldn't have to worry about whether or not the character of Robin would be secure in the future, and whether or not Batman would continue to have his bright light that helped him to, sell books with a younger audience and to make superheroes more kid-friendly. There is a tragedy in that. The idea that there is no real character for Jason here. He is nothing but Dick Grayson light, and it is genuinely kind of sad to read. And in what is arguably the funniest twist of all, this might be when Jason is at his happiest as a character. Then, in typical DC fashion, a crisis happens, specifically Crisis on Infinite Earths. The Anti-Monitor shows up, decides that he wants to erase all of existence, and a big crossover event happens to reset continuity for the characters in the DC universe. And with that reset, we get an entirely revamped reason for why Robin is no longer working with Batman. After a mission gone wrong with the Joker, Bruce feels that it is too dangerous and officially sidelines Dick Grayson as Robin. And that leads us into one of the most beloved panels, at least in my opinion, in Batman history, and that's the panel of Jason Todd taking the tires off of the Batmobile. Jason has been completely rewritten in this post-crisis event to be a very angry, very angsty street kid. His father was lost to crime and his mother was lost to death, and so Jason has nothing but to steal and to try and fight for his own survival on the streets. And ultimately, Bruce takes pity on him when he sees him taking the tires off the Batmobile. He laughs, and he ultimately decides to take Jason to a group home. The group home turns to be run by criminals, so the two of them beat up the criminals, and Bruce officially takes Jason in and takes him under his wing. Not necessarily to be the next Robin, as he does not have the same level of prowess that the original Dick Grayson had, but to at least be his ward. And eventually, though, he does go on to train Jason to be Robin. And for a time, the two of them are truly happy. At least until Jason finds out that his father is not only alive, but is also taking up the moniker of the new Two-Face. Yes, this is from a time when there were multiple different versions of Two-Face. And this is when we get to see Jason having major differences to Dick Grayson in his personality. Jason is angsty, he is angry, and he is full of emotions. We see this constantly throughout his time in the new Batman runs as we see Jason get older. He is more violent, he is more prone to outbursts, he is genuinely more reckless. I mean, he tries to take on an entire gang of enemies by himself and has to get bailed out by Dick Grayson. This is truly an all-new character. The Jason we get post-Crisis, comparatively to the one that we had pre-Crisis, are two wildly different characters. This Jason has his own personality, and while he does have black hair much like Dick Grayson, that's about all they share in common. Jason, as I've mentioned, he's brash, he's angry, he's vengeful, and he's got a truly rebellious spirit. This version of the character has actual character and he has actual substance outside of just being Batman's partner. And that's something the original author of Jason even recognized. In an interview, the original author of Jason brings up the idea that he would have just stuck to a more conventional relationship between him and Batman had he continued writing the character, and laments that this version of Jason that they wrote post-Crisis actually did a world of wonder to help make this character not only stand out on his own, but make the character better, at least in that writer's opinion. Jason himself is finally coming into his own and becoming a character of his own, even if that means that his backstory has to get a little more tragic. He has to live in a world where his mother is gone and his father is Two-Face, but ultimately he gets to be somebody that is his own. And his relationship with Bruce being so very different from the one that he and Dick Grayson shared makes the character so much more interesting. We see a Robin that is more combative towards Batman. We see a Robin that thinks for himself, that goes off on his own, and is oftentimes trying to prove that he is just as much of a hero as Batman is, but instead of the way that Dick Grayson did it, which is following Batman's lead, going by the code, and following the rules of what it means to be a superhero, Jason often takes it in the lane of doing what he believes is right based on his sense of morality that he gained from living his life on the street. We often see this with how Jason likes to handle criminals. He's far more rough, he's far more brutal, and he's far more angry when he deals with them than Jason ever was. Instead of acting as a beacon of light for the most part for Batman, instead, he almost acts as a counterpoint to Batman's darkness. Batman has chosen to bring in a kid that is just as damaged and just as broken as him, and to give him a code to fight for. But instead of with Dick Grayson, where it made him blossom into this beam of light, of hope, and of happiness, it does the exact opposite for Jason. We see throughout a lot of Jason's early time when he is younger as Robin, he is happier, he smiles more, he makes jokes, he laughs. He has this sense that maybe the world will get better, but his time as Robin serves to show him that the world does not get better, the criminals do not get better, rather they get worse. And it's that outlook that changes, it's the fundamental change between how Jason sees the world and how Dick sees the world that truly differentiates the two characters. Because no longer does Jason see the light at the end of the tunnel, but rather he sees that the only way to combat the darkness is to get darker. It's to get harder on criminals. It's to break them so badly that they won't be able to enact the same kind of hurt that they did on their victims previously. That's the lesson Jason took out of being Robin relative to the lessons that Dick Grayson took. And that's the ultimate failure, in my opinion, of Bruce putting Jason in that costume. He failed to recognize the difference, the fundamental difference between Dick Grayson and Jason Todd, and that would be their response to an ever-increasing cycle of violence and crime. And Jason's response was to get darker, to have that beautiful and somewhat innocent child inside of Jason slowly be poisoned and shown that no matter how good he tries to be and no matter how hopeful he tries to be, it's only going to get worse. Dick Grayson took that and he saw it and he got better. Jason got angrier. And we continue to see why Bruce put Jason in this position, because as he admits to Dick Grayson, he missed having a Robin, he missed having a son, he missed having a sidekick, and so he was ready and willing to rush Jason out to be the next Robin. And while Dick does pass on the mantle to Jason, that doesn't solve the problems that we have continually seen throughout a majority of Jason's time as Robin. And this would only culminate into one of his most infamous stories, previous to the most infamous one, Death in the Family, of course. During this story, a diplomat comes from another country, and he is in the process of not only taking advantage of women of the night, but also cutting them. It is his sick, twisted fantasy. And when Jason figures this out, he spares no expense in beating on these men and ensuring that they're getting the justice that they deserve. But because this diplomat has old school diplomatic immunity, meaning we can't press charges on him at all, Jason has to watch him walk. We also see throughout this comic that Jason has absolutely no love for people that take advantage of women. Shout out Jason. And so when a woman cuts a man and kills him, Jason just simply shrugs and moves on, saying it's what he deserved. Jason has very little sympathy for these people and often takes into account that he is low-key judge, jury, and executioner in these statements and in these places. He has no love for this kind of pain and for the way in which these people choose to hurt women. And when Jason finds out that not only can he not do anything about this diplomat, but that this diplomat caused a woman to take her own life, Jason goes to confront him without a second thought. And that's when the diplomat falls. It is left ambiguous as to whether or not Jason pushed the diplomat, but I think that all of us knowing the kind of character Jason is, it wouldn't be much of a surprise if I were to tell you I'm 99% sure that he pushed the diplomat. And with all of that, we're pretty much going to segue into Jason's most iconic story prior to Red Hood, which is Death in the Family. And I just want to preface this by saying people tend to make it out like Jason was super hated going into this storyline, and when DC gave the option to vote as to whether or not to kill the character, people make it seem like everybody hated Jason so much they were calling in and spending 50 cents, which back in the 80s was a lot of money, just to get rid of the character. And while he wasn't the most popular guy out there, I do want to make note that out of the 11,000, almost 11,000 total votes DC took, he only won by 72, The people that wanted to kill Jason only won by 72. The fan base was mostly split. And in a lot of these times, when you go and ask these fans about why they voted the way they did, some of them were even just saying, well, I just wanted to see if DC would do it. If they'd commit to killing a character like Robin, a character that is usually so innocent, and even though this is a character that's already mired in trauma and pain and hurt, can we take it to another level, right? Can we take it a step up? I just want to clear up the little idea that Jason was so hated, people overwhelmingly voted for him to die. No, there was clear sentiment that he was annoying, that he wasn't the most popular of the Robins, that Dick Grayson was a better Robin, because Dick was a little less complicated when it came to Batman. He didn't oppose Bruce as much. He didn't act as the rebellious teenager that the 80s saw a lot of in popular media. He was the golden boy and Jason was the opposite. I've talked at length about that throughout this video already. And so I did just want to bring that up in talking about Jason because I think it's important when discussing the tragedy of the character. He died because he lost by 72 votes. They were going to do the Killing Joke story regardless, but whether or not he was actually going to die was left up to the fans. And because the fans were curious, they voted to see him go. And I think it was honestly super wild and kind of crazy. It's not something you see in most modern comics nowadays. So it's very interesting to read, and it has its own level of tragedy when it comes to a character like Jason, who has already faced so much hardship in his own life, like up until that point. And I know I'm just talking about a comic book character here, but I love these characters, and it's interesting for me to go back and look at their past. For example, the entire time I'm reading The Killing Joke, I'm thinking to myself, man, when's Harley Quinn going to show up? Right? Because I'm thinking to myself, damn, this seems like some shit that would be right up her alley. Like with some of the kind of ridiculous stunts Joker pulls in that comic book, like becoming a diplomat to avoid Batman beating him to death. He becomes a legitimate diplomat with diplomatic immunity. And then it hit me, Harley Quinn doesn't even exist as a character. I started reading comics in like the very late 2000s and early 2010s, as my brain was just starting to develop. I'm a young guy. So having something like that as a reminder that like, oh yeah, this character didn't exist back then. It's kind of funny going back and reading these older comic books. So I really did want to see just how hated Jason was, because people talk about it like he was the worst Robin ever or the middle child. I would argue Damian got more hate than Jason did when Damian first came into the picture, with how rebellious he was and how much of a little shit he was at times. Now for a death in the family. When it comes to Jason's time as Robin, I would argue this is his most definitive story. Batman death in the family. It's also one of Batman's most definitive stories. It's always a must read when it comes to not only the character of Batman, but also understanding the Bat family as a whole. Jason has recently been displaying his more aggressive tendencies and his more reckless tendencies, and so Bruce puts him on probation. And while on probation, Jason finds himself walking to cool off and ends up coming upon his old household. And this is where he figures out that his mother, the one he believed that he knew all of his life, isn't actually his mom, it's his stepmom. And rather, Jason has a biological mother that is out there somewhere, a link to his family, and potentially a link to someone that he can love. And the story originally begins with having multiple different women potentially being Jason's mom, and so Jason has to, of course, travel to the Middle East, specifically Lebanon, in order to try and figure out who his mother is, because for some reason his potential candidates of motherhood are in the Middle East. Bruce tracks him down and follows him, and ultimately the two of them team up in trying to find Jason's mom. Shenanigans ensue specifically regarding Joker trying to sell Jericho missiles to a bunch of very caricaturized Middle Eastern people. This just feels really weird to read in like 2025, and sometimes I just have to remember this is a product of its time. Either way, Jason is slowly chipping away at the list of potential mothers, one of them oddly enough including Lady Shiva, who Jason has to make a quick time decision at one point in the story to decide whether or not Lady Shiva should be helped or he should help Batman, since that might be his mom. But it's revealed to us that Jason's actual mother is all the way in Africa filming some sort of movie for helping African children and basically being some sort of philanthropist. And Joker paints himself in really weird makeup and looks fairly normal in order to make himself more, I don't know, good looking to Jason's mother, so that he can trick Jason's mom into tricking Jason, so that he can get a one-up on Batman. All of this, for the record, has nothing to do with Jason that Joker wants to do. He just wants to get a one-up on Batman because he thinks it would be funny by messing with Batman's only Robin currently. So, of course, when Jason figures out that the Joker is involved and is currently holding his mother hostage, who he's gotten to meet for all of like 5 minutes, Jason rushes over to his mother's side to try and help her. He reveals himself as Robin and opens himself up to her, only to find out that his mother did not have any good interest for him at all. His mom basically chose to set him up and get him beaten damn near to death by the Joker. And even in Jason's final moments, as bombs are ticking to blow the entire compound to smithereens, he is desperately trying his best to save his mother from having to die in an explosion. And when he can't go on more, he encourages his mother to leave. Because at his core, Jason has and will always be a good person. A good person that is surrounded by terrible circumstances in a life that has never appreciated him. One that has broken him down so fundamentally, the only answer to a lot of the problems he sees is being hard and being angry at the world. And so unfortunately, Jason loses his life that night. Jason deserved just about none of this. Sure, he was rough on criminals. Sure, he wasn't the perfect son that Bruce had envisioned, much like Dick Grayson was. He was rough around the edges. But he didn't deserve to be beaten. He didn't deserve to be brutalized. He didn't deserve to be broken in a way in which he might have found one of his only genetic living relatives and had that stripped and taken away from him in one of the most brutal and twisted fashions I think I've ever seen in comic book history. And all of that led to Jason's death. And that was it. Jason was dead for the foreseeable future. And when I mean dead, we mean really dead, like Uncle Ben or the original Captain Marvel. I'm saying dead for real. And for that to be the end of Jason's character, for him to go from being what was essentially a Dick Grayson ripoff and arguably at his happiest to a street orphan that lives with Batman, that was groomed into being a Robin to take on the mantle of being the next generation of hope for Batman, only to see that hope slowly die out of him as he realized crime would truly never get better, and to watch him grow older and bitter and more angry and more sad, to watch him find hope again in the idea that he might have his biological mother out there, and to watch that hope be stripped away from him systematically by the Joker, who was just doing this all for shits and giggles, so that he could get one up on Batman as he beat his brand new Robin to death and used his own mother against him as the ultimate FU, has gotta be some of the most cruel things I've ever read on a comic book panel. It's gotta be one of the most cruel beatings I had seen up until that point, especially reading a Batman comic. And as somebody who just recently got to meet his half-brother for the first time at the age of 19 years old, the idea that I would just find out about my biological mom and for her to turn around and trick me into be working with the Joker, that's a level of hurt that I can't quite describe. That's a level of pain and sadness that Jason had to experience all of these emotions so quickly. And for all of that to just end with him being blown up. And that was it. For a very long time, that was it. And so I ask, when was Jason's life ever not a tragedy? From the onset, it was a tragedy because he was basically just Dick Grayson in a slightly different look with red hair, and even that was eventually erased. And when he got his own origin, his entire life was sad and tragic. It was filled with nothing but my dad is Two-Face, my mother is dead, oh wait, my mom's alive, oh wait, I'm angsty and I'm angry and I don't know what to do with the feelings inside of me. I've been told that I need to fight crime and to save the day, but no matter how much effort I put into saving lives, no matter how much effort I put into being a good person, it all gets wasted and nothing gets better. So why should I even bother being good when it's just easier to get rid of the scum in front of me? And to culminate that all with finding out that your mother is still alive, only for her to be working with what is arguably one of the greatest villains of your generation, and for him to beat you to death and to blow you up, not even because it was about you, but so that he could get back at his arch nemesis who dresses up like a bat? That's horrible. That is tragedy. Not once in Jason's life did he get to experience a normal childhood, a normal life. Dick got the happy ending of what it is to be a child superhero. Jason got the opposite. He is the opposite of Dick Grayson in every measure in this example. And all of that, just so that you can get a plaque on your old costume that you wore to fight crime that you came to resent, that says you were a good soldier. We can put up for debate whether or not Alfred or Bruce was the one to write good soldier on that plaque. And I believe it is worth bringing in that originally when Frank Miller wrote that good soldier line, it was supposed to be a brotherly love kind of thing. This was prior to the Bat family ever existing. But in modern continuities, when you see something like a good soldier being written on Jason's stone and not a loved son or a cared for child, with the way Batman treats his Bat family now, there's a level of pain and tragedy in that to be viewed as just a good soldier after having to have had no chance at a real childhood, at a real life outside of just being Robin. But there was a small moment, a small piece of time, when Jason suited up for the first time that you could say,
"This is the best day of my life."